Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The November rain drummed against the windows of William Sullivan's photography studio in Portland, creating a rhythm that usually soothed him during late editing sessions. At 32, Williams had built his business from nothing, a one-man operation specializing in documentary photography that had earned him modest recognition in artistic circles. His lean frame hunched over the computer, fingers dancing across the keyboard as he color-corrected images from a recent exhibition opening. His phone buzzed. Daryl Hoffman, his older brother by 4 years. "Will, hey. Listen, I know it's last minute, but Carly and I need a huge favor." Daryl's voice carried that particular tone of desperation Williams had learned to recognize over the years. "Can you watch baby Elmer for a few hours? We have to pick up the crib we ordered, and the store closes at 6. It's across town and with traffic." Williams glanced at the clock. 3:30. He had a client meeting at 7, but that left time. "Yeah, sure. Bring him over. You're a lifesaver. We'll be there in 20. Williams saved his work and tidied the studio's front room, moving light stands and clearing space on a vintage leather couch he'd salvaged from an estate sale. His relationship with Daryl had always been complicated, a mixture of brotherly affection and unspoken resentment that neither fully acknowledged. Daryl had followed their father into accounting, married his college sweetheart Carly Barajas, and produced the family's first grandchild with mechanical efficiency. Meanwhile, Williams had disappointed their late father by choosing art over stability, a choice he'd never regretted even as it drove a wedge between them. Their father had died 2 years ago without ever seeing Williams's work displayed in a gallery. That wound still ached. 20 minutes later, Daryl's silver SUV pulled up outside. Williams met them at the door. Carly emerged first, her auburn hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, dark circles under her eyes broadcasting her exhaustion. She'd been a vibrant presence in their family gatherings before Elmer's birth. Quick-witted, warm, always the first to laugh. Now she looked hollowed out, moving with the mechanical precision of the chronically sleep-deprived. "Thank you so much, Will," she said, transferring the infant carrier into his arms without meeting his eyes. "He just ate, so he should be fine for a while. Diapers and wipes are in the bag. We'll be back by 6 at the latest." Daryl clapped Williams on the shoulder, that familiar gesture that somehow always felt patronizing. "Appreciate it, little brother. You're getting a preview of parenthood." He laughed, but sounded forced. Williams noticed how neither of them really looked at the baby, how Carly's hands shook slightly as she handed over the diaper bag, how Daryl kept checking his watch despite having just arrived. "Everything okay with you guys?" Williams asked. Fine. Just tired. You know how it is with newborns." Daryl was already backing toward the car. "We'll text when we're heading back." They left before Williams could ask anything else. He carried 2-month-old Elmer inside, setting the carrier on the cleared couch. The baby slept, his tiny features peaceful, one small fist curled near his mouth. Williams felt that universal human response to infants, protective, awed by their fragility. He'd photographed dozens of newborns for clients, but this was different. This was family blood, his nephew. Williams returned to his editing, checking on Elmer every few minutes. The studio's quiet suited him. No assistants, no partners, just his craft and the stories he tried to capture through his lens. His recent project documented Portland's disappearing working-class neighborhoods, families being priced out by development. The work was personal, political, and unlikely to pay his rent, but it mattered. Around 4:30, Elmer woke crying. Williams scooped him up, supporting the tiny head the way Carly had shown him months ago at the hospital. "Hey there, little man. You're okay." But Elmer wasn't okay. The crying intensified, a sharp wail that escalated into something that sounded almost like pain. Williams walked him around the studio, bouncing gently, trying the soothing techniques he'd seen parents use. The crying continued, growing more desperate. "Come on, buddy. What's wrong?" Williams checked the time. Only an hour since he'd eaten. Could he be hungry again? Williams knew nothing about feeding schedules. He tried everything: walking, rocking, gentle patting. Elmer's face turned red, his tiny body rigid with distress. This wasn't normal crying. Something was genuinely wrong. Williams laid him back in the carrier, talking softly as he checked for obvious problems. Maybe the carrier straps were too tight? He loosened them. Elmer's crying never stopped, and now Williams noticed how the baby's legs seemed to pull up toward his stomach, like he was in pain. Okay, let me check your diaper. Williams unbuttoned the blue onesie with trembling fingers. He'd never been great with babies, always afraid of doing something wrong. He pulled aside the diaper and froze. Time seemed to stop. The rain against the windows faded. Elmer's crying became distant. All of Williams's attention focused on what he was seeing, and his mind struggled to process it, rejecting it even as his eyes transmitted the information. Bruises. Dark purple and yellow bruises covering the baby's inner thighs and lower abdomen. Not the kind from a fall or accident. These were fingerprint-shaped. Small adult fingers pressed into tender infant skin with enough force to leave marks that had aged through several stages of healing. Williams's hands began to shake. His stomach lurched. Professional instinct from years of documentary work kicked in. Evidence documentation. He grabbed his phone and photographed what he saw. His photographer's eye automatically adjusting angles for clarity even as his mind screamed. Someone had hurt this baby. Someone had held him hard enough to bruise. Multiple times, given the different stages of discoloration. And Daryl and Carly had left so quickly. Neither had looked at Elmer. Carly shaking hands. Daryl's forced laugh. "Oh God," Williams whispered. "Oh God, no." He refastened the diaper with shaking hands, wrapped Elmer in the carrier blanket, and grabbed his keys. The baby's crying had subsided into exhausted whimpers. Williams's mind raced as he locked the studio and carried Elmer to his old Jeep. Emergency room. He needed to get Elmer to an emergency room. Now. But as he started the engine, his phone buzzed. A text from Daryl. "Traffic is worse than we thought. Might be closer to 7. Hope he's being good." Williams stared at the message. 7 o'clock. 3 more hours they'd planned to stay away. Long enough that Williams might not have noticed anything wrong. Might have just handed Elmer back when they returned. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. All the complicated feelings about his brother, the resentment, the distance, the unspoken competition, crystallized into something clear and cold. If Daryl or Carly had done this, Williams would make them pay. Family or not, blood or not, whoever had hurt this innocent child would face consequences. But first, Elmer needed help. Williams drove through the rain toward Providence Portland Medical Center, his nephew whimpering softly in the back seat. His mind was already working, analyzing, planning. Years of documentary photography had taught him to see what others missed, to capture truth even when people try to hide it. He'd exposed corruption, abuse, and injustice through his camera. Now he'd use those same skills to protect Elmer and find out who had done this. The rain intensified as he drove, and Williams felt something hardening inside him. A determination he'd only experienced once before, when he decided to pursue photography, despite his father's disapproval. That same certainty that he was doing the right thing, regardless of cost. He'd always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided confrontation. Not anymore. Whatever came next, Williams was ready. The emergency room of Providence Portland buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses moving between curtained areas, monitors beeping, the antiseptic smell mixing with wet clothes and stress. Williams stood at the triage desk, Elmer's carrier clutched in both hands, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need someone to examine my nephew. I found bruises. I think someone might have hurt him." The triage nurse, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, immediately called for a doctor. Within minutes, Williams found himself in a private examination room with Dr. Kelvin Gallagher, a pediatrician who looked barely 30 but moved with practiced confidence. "I'm going to examine him now," Dr. Gallagher said gently, lifting Elmer from the carrier. "Can you tell me exactly what you observed?" Williams explained, showing the photos on his phone. Dr. Gallagher's expression remained professionally neutral, but Williams saw his jaw tighten. The examination took 20 minutes. Dr. Gallagher worked carefully, documenting everything, his gloved hands gentle as Elmer fussed and cried. Finally, he looked up at Williams. You did the right thing bringing him in. These are definitely non-accidental injuries. Multiple contusions in various stages of healing, indicating repeated trauma. He paused. I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police. Do you understand? Williams nodded, his throat tight. His parents, my brother and his wife, they asked me to babysit a few hours ago. They seemed off, rushed. They didn't look at him. Where are they now? Shopping. They said they'd be back around 7. Dr. Gallagher made notes on his tablet. The police will want to speak with you, and likely with the parents when they return. For now, Elmer will be admitted for observation and a complete medical workup. We need to ensure there aren't other injuries. A social worker arrived, Wendy Barnett, introduced herself with a kind but weary expression. She'd seen cases like this before, Williams could tell. Probably saw them all the time. Mr. Sullivan, I know this is difficult, Wendy said as they sat in a small consultation room. Can you walk me through everything from the beginning? Williams recounted the afternoon, every detail he could remember. Daryl's call, their rushed handoff, the way they'd avoided looking at Elmer. When he took notes, asked clarifying questions, never showing judgment, but clearly building a timeline. Have you observed anything concerning about your brother or sister-in-law's behavior before today? She asked. Williams thought back. I haven't seen them much since Elmer was born. Maybe 3 times? They seemed stressed, tired, but I thought that was normal new parent stuff. He paused. Carly was different, though. Before the baby, she was lighter, happy. After Elmer came, she seemed almost scared of him. Scared how? Like she didn't want to hold him. At the hospital, when we all visited, she barely looked at him. I thought it might be postpartum depression or something. Wendy nodded. That's helpful information. The police detective will want to hear all of this as well. Detective Andre Hendricks arrived an hour later. A solid man in his mid-40s with graying temples and the patient demeanor of someone who'd worked difficult cases too long. He recorded Williams's statement, examined the photos, and consulted with Dr. Gallagher. We'll need to interview the parents when they arrive, Detective Hendricks said. In the meantime, an emergency custody order has been issued. Elmer won't be going home with them tonight. Williams's phone buzzed. Daryl, got the crib. Heading to grab dinner, then we'll swing by around 7:30, if that's cool. Looking at the message, Williams felt anger burning in his chest. They were having dinner while their son lay in a hospital with bruises they'd somehow failed to notice, or worse, had caused. He showed the message to Detective Hendricks, who nodded. Don't respond yet. We'll handle this carefully. Williams sat in the waiting area, his mind churning. A few hours ago, his biggest concern had been finishing a color correction. Now his family was imploding, his nephew was hospitalized, and he was at the center of an abuse investigation. But underneath the shock and anger, Williams felt something else. Purpose. Clarity. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let Elmer get hurt again. He'd protect this kid with everything he had. At 7:40, Daryl and Carly walked into the emergency room, looking confused. Williams stood, and Daryl's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Will? What's going on? Why are you? Where's Elmer? Detective Hendricks stepped forward, badge out. Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman? I'm Detective Hendricks with Portland PD. I need to speak with both of you about your son. Carly's face went white. Daryl's confusion deepened. What? Why? What happened? Your son was brought in with injuries consistent with physical abuse. We need to ask you some questions. The next hour unfolded like a nightmare. Daryl and Carly were separated, interviewed individually. Williams watched from a distance as his brother's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like genuine confusion. Carly dissolved into tears almost immediately. Detective Hendricks returned to Williams. Neither is admitting to anything. Both seem shocked, but that's not unusual in these cases. Do you think they did it? Williams asked. I think we need to investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, Elmer needs a temporary placement. Given that you discovered the abuse and brought him in, and that your family, would you be willing to serve as an emergency foster placement? Williams didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely. Paperwork followed, forms, background checks expedited through the system, a home inspection scheduled for the next day. Through it all, Williams kept thinking about those bruises, about Elmer's desperate crying, about how close he'd come to just handing the baby back without ever knowing. Near midnight, exhausted and overwhelmed, Williams sat in Elmer's hospital room watching the baby sleep in the clear bassinet. The injuries had been photographed, documented, and measured. Blood work had been drawn. A skeletal survey would happen tomorrow to check for fractures. His phone buzzed. Daryl, from a number Williams didn't recognize. How could you do this? Call CPS on your own brother? We didn't do anything to him. Williams stared at the message. Part of him wanted to believe Daryl. Family loyalty ran deep, and his brother had never shown any signs of violence. But the evidence didn't lie. Those bruises came from somewhere. He typed back, "Then who did, Daryl? Who hurt him?" The response came quickly. "I don't know, but it wasn't us. You've destroyed our family over a misunderstanding." Williams didn't reply. Tomorrow he'd need to prepare his studio apartment for a baby, buy supplies, figure out how to care for an infant while the investigation unfolded. Tonight, he just sat watching Elmer sleep and made a silent promise. No matter who had done this, brother, sister-in-law, or someone else entirely, Williams would find out. And they would pay for every bruise, every moment of pain inflicted on this innocent child. The rain had stopped outside. Through the hospital window, Williams could see the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. Somewhere out there, someone had answers. Someone knew the truth. William Sullivan had spent his career exposing hidden truths through photography. Now he'd use every skill he possessed to expose this one. The game had begun, and he wouldn't stop until Elmer was safe and justice was served. The home inspection happened at 10 the next morning. Williams had spent the pre-dawn hours baby-proofing his studio apartment, a converted warehouse space he'd lived in for 5 years. The social worker, Wendy Barnett, walked through methodically, checking outlets, cabinet locks, and asking questions about his work schedule and support system. "You understand this is temporary?" Wendy asked, making notes on her tablet. "Until the investigation concludes." "I understand, but I'm prepared for however long Elmer needs to be here." She approved the placement. By noon, Williams was back at the hospital, receiving instructions from nurses on feeding schedules, safe sleep practices, and warning signs to watch for. Dr. Gallagher pulled him aside. The skeletal survey came back. No fractures, which is good, but we found something else. He pulled up images on his computer. "See these? Retinal hemorrhages in both eyes. Consistent with shaken baby syndrome." Williams felt his stomach drop. Someone shook him. "The pattern of injuries suggests it. The bruising, the retinal hemorrhages, classic presentation. Whoever did this grabbed him hard enough to bruise and shook him violently enough to cause bleeding in his eyes. Will he be okay?" "Physically, yes. He's young enough that with proper care, he should heal completely. But we'll need follow-up exams." Dr. Gallagher's expression hardened. "Whoever did this could have killed him, Mr. Sullivan. Shaken baby syndrome can cause permanent brain damage or death. Elmer was lucky you found him when you did." Lucky. Williams thought about that word as he drove Elmer back to the studio that afternoon, a car seat borrowed from the hospital secured in the back. Lucky seemed like the wrong word for a baby who'd been violently abused. But maybe lucky that his uncle had cared enough to look, to act, to protect him. The next days blurred together. Williams learned to function on broken sleep, to decipher different types of cries, to change diapers and warm bottles at 3 in the morning. His photography work suffered. He postponed the client meeting, put projects on hold, and stopped returning calls from everyone except Detective Hendricks. The investigation was moving slowly. Daryl and Carly had lawyered up, both maintaining their innocence. Their attorney, a sharp woman named Petra Todd, had issued a statement claiming the injuries were accidental, that babies bruise easily, that the whole thing was a tragic misunderstanding. Williams didn't believe it for a second. On the 4th day, Detective Hendricks visited the studio. Williams had just gotten Elmer down for a nap and was staring at his computer screen, trying to make sense of the half-finished editing work that now seemed meaningless. "Got a few minutes?" Hendricks asked, accepting Williams's offer of coffee. They sat in the studio's kitchen area, a small space Williams had carved out with a vintage table and mismatched chairs. Hendricks laid out photos from the investigation. Crime scene photos from Daryl and Carly's house, medical reports, interview transcripts. We executed a search warrant on their home, Hendricks said. Found some interesting things. First, their neighbor, a woman named Lily Stewart, reported hearing a baby crying intensely several nights over the past month, sometimes for hours. She almost called the police twice, but didn't want to interfere. Williams's jaw clenched. Hours. Her statement says the crying sounded distressed, different from normal baby crying. Hendricks pulled out more photos. We also found damage to the nursery wall. Small dent, about fist-sized, with paint chips on the carpet. Recent, based on the condition. Someone punched the wall, or threw something at it. We're waiting on forensics. Hendricks leaned back. Here's where it gets complicated. Daryl's story checks out for most of the timeline. He works long hours at his accounting firm, 50, 60 hours a week. Multiple colleagues confirm he's been there late most nights since Elmer was born. His time card supported. So he wasn't home when it happened? Probably not. Which brings us to Carly. Hendricks's expression grew troubled. She's a different story. Quit her job as a graphic designer when Elmer was born. Stays home full-time. No family nearby. Few friends. Her social media went dark after the birth. She used to post constantly. Now nothing for 2 months. Williams thought about Carly at family gatherings before Elmer. Vibrant, engaged, always the life of the party. Then he thought about her hollow eyes and shaking hands when she dropped Elmer off. You think she did it? I think she had the most opportunity. But she's not talking, and without a confession or witness, it's hard to prove. Hendricks paused. There's something else. Medical records show Carly was treated for postpartum depression 6 weeks ago. Prescribed medication she never filled. Her OB recommended therapy she never attended. Why wouldn't she get help? Shay, maybe fear. Or Daryl didn't believe she needed it. Hendricks gathered his photos. I've worked child abuse cases for 15 years, Williams. This is all the hallmarks of a parent who's overwhelmed, isolated, and not coping. Someone who snapped. After Hendricks left, Williams stood at the window, watching rain start up again. Below, Portland's streets glistened, people hurrying with umbrellas. Normal life continuing while his nephew fought to heal from violence that should never have happened. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Will. Carly's voice, thin and desperate. Please, I need to talk to you. Carly, I don't think. I didn't hurt him. I swear to God, I would never hurt my baby. But nobody believes me, and Daryl won't even look at me. And I need someone to listen. Williams closed his eyes. Every instinct screamed not to engage. But something in her voice, raw terror and grief, made him pause. Talk, he said quietly. Can we meet? Just 15 minutes? I'm not supposed to contact you, but I don't care anymore. I need you to understand. She was crying now. Please, Will. You're the only one who might believe me. Against his better judgment, Williams agreed. They met an hour later at a coffee shop near his studio. Carly looked terrible. Unwashed hair, clothes hanging loose on her frame, eyes red and swollen. She'd aged 10 years in 2 months. They sat in a back corner. Carly wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she didn't drink. I love being pregnant, she said softly. Everyone talks about how hard it is, but I loved it. Felt connected to this little life growing inside me. Felt like I finally understood my purpose, you know? William said nothing, just listened. Then Elmer was born, and it was like a switch flipped. I couldn't bond with him. Couldn't feel anything except fear and exhaustion. He cried all the time, and I couldn't figure out what he needed, and Daryl kept saying I was doing it wrong. Her voice cracked. I thought I was losing my mind. Did you shake him, Carly? No. I swear on everything I am, I never shook him. Never grabbed him hard enough to bruise. I was terrified of hurting him, so scared that I'd do something wrong that I barely wanted to touch him. Then how do you explain the injuries? Carly's hands trembled around the cup. That's what I need to tell you. There's someone else. Someone who was there when Daryl wasn't. Williams leaned forward. Who? Daryl's mother. Glenda Grant. The name hit Williams like cold water. Glenda Grant. Daryl's mother from his father's first marriage. Williams's father had divorced Glenda when Daryl was 8, before Williams was even born. Williams had met her maybe 5 times in his life, always at awkward family events where she glared daggers at Williams's own mother. "Glenda was helping you with Elmer?" Daryl insisted. Said I needed help, that his mom raised him fine and could teach me. She started coming over every day while he was at work. Carly's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "She hated me, Will. Always has." Thought Daryl married beneath him. And when Elmer came, what happened? She criticized everything I did. Said I was holding him wrong, feeding him wrong, not being strict enough. She kept saying babies need discipline, that crying is manipulation. I tried to tell Daryl, but he said I was being paranoid, that his mother was just old-fashioned. Williams's mind raced. Glenda Grant. He remembered her from his father's funeral. A bitter woman in her 60s who'd spent the entire service making snide comments about Williams's mother and the real family she'd replaced. Did you see her hurt Elmer? Not directly, but there were nights after she'd been there when he'd cried differently. When I'd change him and see marks. I asked her about it once, and she said I was imagining things that babies bruise from being picked up wrong. Carly finally met his eyes. I should have said something. Should have made Daryl listen. But I was so exhausted, so confused, and she made me feel crazy. Why didn't you tell the police this? I did, but they say I'm trying to shift blame. Petra, our lawyer, she says without evidence, it just makes me look worse. Like I'm making up stories. Fresh tears spilled down Carly's cheeks. I failed my son, Will. Even if I didn't hurt him physically, I failed to protect him. I'll live with that forever. But I need you to know I didn't do it. And I need you to help me prove who did. William sat back, mind working through the angles. Glenda Grant, a bitter woman with access and opportunity. A grandmother from a different generation with toxic ideas about discipline. It fit, but could he prove it? Where is she now? Williams asked. Her house in Beaverton. Daryl won't talk to her either. The investigation scared her off. But she's out there, free, while I'm losing everything. Williams made a decision. I'll look into it. But Carly, if you're lying to me. I'm not. I swear. She grabbed his hand across the table. Thank you for at least listening. That's more than anyone else has done. After Carly left, Williams sat alone with his thoughts. Could he trust her? Or was this exactly what a guilty person would do? Create doubt, point fingers elsewhere? He needed more information, and he knew exactly how to get it. That night, after putting Elmer to bed, Williams opened his laptop and did what he did best, research. He dug into Glenda Grant's background, social media, anything he could find. What he discovered was illuminating. Glenda had been married 3 times, Williams's father being husband number 2. She'd had 5 children total, Daryl from her first marriage, then 2 daughters from the second marriage who'd both moved across the country and cut contact years ago. Public records showed she'd been investigated by CPS twice in the 80s when her daughters were young, though no charges were ever filed. Williams found archived newspaper articles about one of the investigations. Neighbors had reported hearing children crying, seeing bruises. Nothing had been proven, but the pattern was there. He went deeper, finding old blog posts Glenda had written under a pseudonym about parenting. The content was disturbing. Screeds about modern parents being too soft, children needing firm hands and real discipline, babies being manipulative. She ranted about permissive parenting ruining society, how her generation knew how to raise children properly. The blog had comments from people challenging her views, calling her abusive. She'd responded with fury, doubling down on her beliefs. Williams took screenshots of everything, building a file. Then he did something that crossed a legal line, but felt necessary. He pulled up Glenda's address and started planning surveillance. If she'd hurt Elmer, he'd prove it. And when he did, she'd pay. Not just legal consequences. Williams wanted more than that. He wanted her to feel what Elmer had felt. Helpless, hurt, terrified. He wanted her to understand the weight of her crimes in a way that went beyond a courtroom. The photographer in him knew how to watch, how to wait, how to capture the truth when people thought no one was looking. He'd use those skills now, not for art, but for justice. Over the next week, Williams established a routine. Mornings with Elmer, feeding, playing, doctor's appointments to track his healing. Afternoons reviewing footage from the camera he'd set up outside Glenda's house. a small device hidden in his car that he parked strategically down her street. What he saw disturbed him. Glenda lived alone in a rundown two-story house, her yard overgrown, curtains drawn. She rarely left, and when she did, her expression was hard, angry at the world. But on the third day of surveillance, Williams hit gold. A visitor arrived at Glenda's house, a woman in her late 60s with similar features. Williams ran her face through a reverse image search and found her, Lenora Briggs, Glenda's sister. He repositioned his camera with better audio pickup, a directional microphone he used for documentary work. That evening, he recorded their conversation on Glenda's front porch. "Can't believe that ungrateful girl is trying to blame you," Lenora's voice crackled through his speakers. "After everything you did to help her. She was worthless as a mother." Glenda's bitter tone came through clearly. "That baby cried constantly because she didn't know how to handle him. Someone had to teach her. Someone had to show that child who's in charge. You always knew best with children. Look how well Daryl turned out." "Exactly. Firm discipline. That's all babies need. A little shake to stop the crying, a firm grip to show control. My generation understood that." Williams's hands clenched around his laptop. There it was. A confession, clear as day, caught on audio. He immediately called Detective Hendricks, sending the file while they were still on the phone. "This is admissible?" Williams asked. "It's Oregon one-party consent state, and you were in a public area recording a conversation happening outdoors. Should be fine, but let me verify with the DA." 2 hours later, Hendricks called back. "We're moving on Glenda Grant. Search warrant and arrest warrant both approved." "Good work, Williams." The arrest happened the next morning. Williams wasn't there to see it, but Hendricks called with details. Glenda had been belligerent, denied everything at first, then claimed she was only trying to help. Her lawyer tried to spin it as generational differences, but the evidence was mounting. Carly called him sobbing with relief. "They believe me now. The lawyer says the charges against me will probably be dropped." Williams felt a grim satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Legal justice was one thing. True accountability was another. That night, Williams drafted a plan. Not illegal, exactly, but definitely in a gray area. He'd spent his career telling stories through images, exposing truth. Now he'd craft a different kind of exposure. He reached out to contacts in Portland's media, journalists he'd worked with on documentary projects, editors who trusted his work. He gave them the full story with carefully curated evidence. Glenda's confession, her history, the medical reports showing Elmer's injuries. Within days, the story exploded across local media. Grandmother arrested in shaken baby case. CPS investigation reveals generational abuse pattern. Victim's uncle exposes family secret. Williams made sure Glenda's face was everywhere. Her words about firm discipline and children needing control quoted extensively. He gave interviews painting a picture of a bitter, abusive woman who'd hurt an innocent child and tried to let his mother take the blame. Public opinion turned savage. Glenda's address was published online. People protested outside her house. Her social media accounts were flooded with death threats and harassment. She couldn't leave her house without being recognized and confronted. Williams watched it all unfold with cold satisfaction. This was his revenge, not violence, but exposure, forcing her to face the consequences of her actions in the court of public opinion, where mercy was rare and justice swift. But he wasn't done yet. Through his media contacts, Williams obtained Glenda's phone number. Late one night, with Elmer sleeping peacefully nearby, he called her from a burner phone. "Who is this?" Glenda's voice was shaky, afraid. "Someone who knows what you did," Williams said quietly. "Someone who's going to make sure you never hurt another child." "I didn't. It was an accident. Save it for your lawyer. I'm calling to let you know that every person you hurt, every child you damaged with your discipline, they're all going to know your name now. Your face will be synonymous with child abuse. You'll never have peace again. You can't do this. I have rights." So did Elmer. So did your daughters. So did every child you traumatized with your toxic beliefs. Williams's voice was ice. "This is justice, Glenda. Real justice. You're going to live with what you've done, and everyone will know." He hung up. Over the following weeks, The legal case built momentum. The DA charged Glenda with multiple counts of felony child abuse. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, but with the confession, medical evidence, and Williams's documentation, the case was airtight. Carly was cleared of all charges. She and Daryl started intensive therapy, working to repair their marriage and prepare for Elmer's eventual return home. William saw the change in them, especially in Carly, who seemed to wake up from a nightmare. But Williams wasn't ready to give Elmer back. Not yet. Not until he was absolutely certain the child would be safe. 2 months after Glenda's arrest, Williams sat in the prosecutor's office across from ADA Clifton Howe, a methodical man in his 50s who'd built a career on complex abuse cases. "We're offering her a deal," Howe said, sliding papers across the desk. "Plead guilty to reduced charges, 5 years prison time, permanent restraining order from Elmer and any other minors." Williams felt rage bloom in his chest. 5 years? She could have killed him. "I understand your frustration, but trials are risky. Juries are unpredictable, especially with older defendants who present well." Her lawyer will play the generational differences card, make her seem like a confused grandmother who didn't know better. "We could lose entirely. You have her confession. We have an ambiguous conversation that her lawyer will claim was taken out of context. The medical evidence is strong, but without Glenda actually admitting she shook Elmer specifically, a defense attorney can create reasonable doubt. How lean forward? 5 years guaranteed versus risking acquittal. I know which I'd choose. Williams left the office furious. 5 years wasn't enough. Not for what she'd done. Not for the terror Elmer had experienced, the pain, the potential lifelong consequences. He needed to think, needed to plan. That evening, Williams received unexpected visitors, Daryl and Carly, standing nervously at his studio door. "Can we come in?" Daryl asked quietly. Williams let them in. They sat awkwardly in his living space, looking at Elmer sleeping in the portable crib Williams had set up. The baby had grown visibly in 2 months, filling out the bruises long faded. He smiled now, cooed at Williams during feedings. He was healing. "We've been in therapy," Carly said softly. "Individual and couples. Working through everything." She paused. "I want to apologize to you, Will, for putting you in this position, for not protecting Elmer sooner. I should have believed you when you tried to tell me about my mother," Daryl added. His voice was rough with emotion. "I was so caught up in work, so sure I knew what was right, that I didn't see what was happening in my own house." Williams studied his brother. Daryl looked different, older, worn down, but also somehow more present than Williams had ever seen him. The corporate polish was gone, replaced with raw vulnerability. "You should have listened," Williams said quietly. To Carly. "To the warning signs. You failed as a father, Daryl." His brother flinched, but didn't argue. "I know. I'm trying to do better. We both are. The therapist says we're making progress," Carly offered. "Learning to communicate, to share responsibilities, to recognize warning signs. We've joined a support group for parents dealing with postpartum issues and family trauma." "That's good," Williams said. "But it doesn't change what happened." "We know." Daryl met his eyes. "We're not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we are asking for a chance to prove we can be better parents. When the time comes for Elmer to come home, we want to show you we're ready." Williams felt conflicted. Part of him wanted to refuse, to fight for permanent custody of Elmer. But another part, the part that remembered Daryl teaching him to ride a bike, protecting him from bullies, being a brother before life complicated everything. That part wanted to believe people could change. "I need to see it," Williams said finally. "Not just hear about it. You want Elmer back? Prove you deserve him." They agreed to weekly visits at the studio, supervised by Williams. Slowly, carefully, Daryl and Carly began rebuilding trust. They were attentive, gentle, present in ways they hadn't been before. Carly had started medication for her postpartum depression and seemed like a different person, engaged, warm, actually bonding with her son. But Williams remained watchful. He documented everything, took notes on their interactions, looked for any red flags. Once burned, he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Meanwhile, Glenda's case progressed. She refused the plea deal, convinced she could win at trial. Her lawyer, Petra Todd, the same one who'd initially represented Daryl and Carly, built a defense around reasonable doubt and generational misunderstanding. Williams attended every pre-trial hearing, sitting in the gallery watching Glenda. She never looked at him, kept her eyes forward, playing the role of a confused elderly woman who'd only tried to help. It was a good performance. But Williams had learned something important during his surveillance weeks. Glenda Grant wasn't acting alone. Her sister Lenora had been complicit, encouraging her, validating her abusive methods. And there were others, members of an online community Glenda frequented, people who shared her toxic beliefs about child discipline. Williams had infiltrated that community using a fake profile, documenting their conversations. What he found was disturbing. Parents and grandparents sharing techniques for controlling children, comparing notes on how to leave minimal evidence, encouraging each other to ignore modern soft parenting advice. It was a network of abuse, hidden in plain sight online. He brought this information to Detective Hendricks. This is bigger than just Glenda. There are dozens of people in this group, maybe hundreds. How many children are being hurt by this ideology? Hendricks looked through the screenshots, his expression darkening. This is beyond my scope. This needs federal involvement, FBI, Child Exploitation Division. Within a week, a federal investigation was launched. Williams's documentation became the foundation for a larger probe into online communities promoting child abuse under the guise of traditional discipline. But while the federal case built slowly, Glenda's trial approached fast. The trial began on a cold Monday in February. Williams sat behind the prosecution table. Elmer, now 4 months old and thriving, safe with a vetted babysitter. He'd insisted on being present for every moment. ADA Howe's opening statement was strong, laying out the evidence methodically. Glenda's lawyer countered with appeals to sympathy, a confused grandmother from a different time, trying to help overwhelmed parents, accidentally causing harm through ignorance. The medical testimony was damning. Dr. Gallagher walked the jury through Elmer's injuries with calm precision, explaining exactly what force was needed to cause such damage. This wasn't accidental, he concluded. These injuries require intentional violence. Carly testified, describing Glenda's criticism and control, the changes she noticed in Elmer after Glenda's visits. She was credible, sympathetic, but Petra Todd's cross-examination tried to paint her as an unreliable mother looking for someone to blame. Daryl testified about his mother's beliefs, admitting he'd been blind to the danger. His testimony felt honest, painful, a son acknowledging his mother's capacity for harm. Then Williams testified. He walked the jury through finding Elmer, the bruises, his decision to act. He showed the photos he'd taken, explained his investigation, played the recording of Glenda's confession. Petra Todd tried to discredit the recording, suggesting it was taken out of context or misinterpreted. But Williams had prepared for this, brought in audio forensic experts who verified the recording's authenticity and clarity. On cross-examination, Petra went after Williams's motives. Isn't it true you had a strained relationship with your brother? That you resented his success, his family? My relationship with Daryl is complicated, Williams admitted. But this isn't about him. It's about protecting a child who is being hurt. Isn't it convenient that your investigation paints your brother's mother as the villain while clearing your brother and his wife? It's not convenient. It's what the evidence shows. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Expert after expert testified. Child psychologists, abuse specialists, forensic investigators. The prosecution built an overwhelming case. But Glenda's lawyer had one final card to play. They called character witnesses, people who knew Glenda as a volunteer at her church, a friendly neighbor, a devoted grandmother to her other grandchildren, the ones Williams learned she saw rarely and only at supervised family events. The defense tried to create doubt. Could this nice older woman really be capable of such violence? In her closing argument, Petra Todd played heavily on generational differences. Glenda Grant grew up in a time when parenting was different, firmer. What we now call abuse, they called discipline. She didn't shake baby Elmer out of malice. She was trying to quiet his crying using methods she'd been taught were acceptable. It was a strong argument. Williams saw some jurors nodding. But ADA House closing was stronger. The defense wants you to excuse violence as a generational misunderstanding. But Glenda Grant didn't live in the 1950s. She lived in 2024. She had access to modern parenting information. She chose to ignore it. She chose her own beliefs over a child's safety. And when that child suffered injuries that could have killed him, she said nothing, did nothing, let others take the blame. Hal pointed at the medical photos blown up on screens. These injuries don't lie. The retinal hemorrhages don't lie. And Glenda Grant's own words, caught on recording, don't lie. She hurt this baby, and she needs to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Williams spent those days caring for Elmer, trying to maintain normalcy while anxiety gnawed at him. What if they acquitted? What if Glenda walked free? On the afternoon of the third day, Williams's phone rang. "Hendricks, verdict's in. Get down here." Williams arranged for Wendy Barnett to watch Elmer and rushed to the courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Media, family members, advocates. Williams found a seat behind the prosecution table just as the jury filed in. He studied their faces, looking for clues. Most wouldn't meet Glenda's eyes. That had to be good, right? The judge asked for the verdict. The forewoman stood, a black woman in her 40s who'd taken extensive notes throughout the trial. On the count of felony child abuse in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Williams felt something release in his chest. Around him, people reacted. Carly's sob of relief, Daryl's exhaled breath, murmurs from the gallery. But the forewoman wasn't done. On the count of assault in the second degree, guilty. On the count of criminal mistreatment in the first degree, guilty. Guilty on all counts. Glenda's face crumbled. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, turning to glare at Williams across the courtroom. The hatred in her eyes was pure, undiluted. Williams stared back, unflinching. He'd won. Justice had been served. But he wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The prosecution asked for the maximum, 15 years. The defense pleaded for leniency, given Glenda's age and lack of prior criminal convictions. Williams submitted a victim impact statement, writing from Elmer's perspective, what the child had suffered, what he'd lost in terms of trust and safety, what his future might hold. He described finding Elmer crying, the terror of seeing those bruises, the helplessness of knowing someone he should have been able to trust had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The judge, a woman named Viola Hayden who presided with firm fairness throughout, read Williams's statement aloud in court. Then she turned to Glenda. "Do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Glenda stood, her lawyer beside her. Williams expected denial, excuses, the same victim blaming he'd seen throughout the trial. Instead, Glenda said, "I did what I thought was right. What I was taught was right. If that makes me a criminal in this soft, permissive society, so be it. But I won't apologize for trying to teach that child proper behavior." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hayden's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order!" Williams felt cold fury. Even now, even after everything, she showed no remorse, no understanding of the harm she'd caused. Judge Hayden's voice was ice. "Ms. Grant, in my 20 years on the bench, I've seen many defendants. Some show genuine remorse. Some struggle to understand their actions. Some try to minimize harm. You, however, stand before me utterly unrepentant, convinced of your righteousness even as the evidence of your cruelty is irrefutable." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You took a helpless infant and hurt him. Repeatedly, violently, and you feel no shame. That tells me everything I need to know about your character and the danger you pose to vulnerable children. On the count of felony child abuse in the first degree, I sentence you to 10 years in the custody of the Oregon Department of Corrections. On the counts of assault and criminal mistreatment, 5 years each to run consecutively. Total sentence, 20 years, with no possibility of parole for the first 10. 20 years. Glenda would be in her 80s when released, if she lived that long. Williams watched as officers led her away in handcuffs, her face shocked, finally understanding the weight of consequences. It felt good. It felt right. But still not enough. That night, Williams sat with Elmer, watching the baby play with soft blocks. The child had no memory of what had been done to him, would grow up knowing only the story he'd be told. In some ways, that was a mercy. In others, it was a tragedy. Elmer would never understand his own origin story, the violence that had marked his earliest days. Williams's phone buzzed. An unknown email. He opened it, expecting spam. Instead, he found a message from one of Glenda's daughters, the ones who'd cut contact years ago. Williams had reached out to them during his investigation, but they'd refused to speak publicly. The email was brief. Thank you for stopping her. She hurt us too, when we were small. No one believed us then. I'm glad someone believes now. I'm glad someone finally made her pay. Dolores. Williams sat for a long time, thinking about cycles of abuse, about courage and cowardice, about the difference between justice and revenge. He'd gotten justice for Elmer. But what about the others? The children hurt in that online community? The victims who'd never been believed? An idea began forming, dangerous and compelling. Over the next month, Williams worked with federal investigators, providing everything he'd collected on the online abuse community. He gave media interviews, wrote op-eds, used his platform as a photographer to shine light on the hidden networks promoting child abuse under various guises. His work went viral. Mainstream media picked up the story. Tech companies shut down the forums. Parents were arrested, children removed from dangerous homes. Investigations launched across multiple states. Williams became the face of the investigation, the protective uncle who'd exposed systemic abuse. He hated the attention, but understood its value. Every interview, every article, every social media post meant more people were aware, more children potentially saved. But late at night, alone with Elmer, Williams wondered if it was enough. Would it ever be enough? How many children were still suffering because no one looked, no one acted, no one cared enough to intervene? He thought about his own father, about the distance that had grown between them over Williams's choice to pursue art instead of stability. His father had died disappointed in him, or so Williams had always believed. But would his father be proud now? Seeing Williams protect family, fight for the vulnerable, use his skills for something that mattered beyond galleries and grants? Williams would never know, and that hurt in its own way. 6 months after Glenda's sentencing, the custody hearing for Elmer took place. The judge reviewed everything: therapy records, home studies, psychological evaluations, Williams's observations of Daryl and Carly's progress. Winnie Barnett testified that the couple had done everything asked of them, had genuinely transformed their approach to parenting. Dr. Gallagher confirmed Elmer's complete physical recovery. Detective Hendricks stated the investigation found no evidence that Daryl or Carly had directly harmed the child. The defense called Williams to testify about what he'd observed during 6 months of supervised visits. He told the truth. Daryl and Carly had changed. They were attentive, responsive, genuinely engaged with their son in ways they hadn't been before. Carly's mental health treatment was ongoing and effective. Daryl had reduced his work hours, reprioritized his life around family. "Do you believe Elmer would be safe in their care?" the judge asked. Williams hesitated. Every protective instinct screamed to say no, to fight for permanent custody. Elmer was his now, in all the ways that mattered. He'd bonded with this child, knew his cries and smiles, his preferences and patterns. But he also knew the truth. "Yes," Williams said quietly. "I believe he'd be safe. I believe they've learned and changed. And I believe Elmer deserves to grow up with his parents, if they can be what he needs." The judge ordered a gradual transition, overnight visits, then weekends, then full custody with Williams maintaining regular contact and visitation rights written into the order. The first night Williams returned to his studio alone, silence felt oppressive. No baby monitor, number 2 AM feedings, no small life depending on him. Just empty space and echoes. He sat at his computer, trying to work on photography projects that had languished for months. But nothing felt meaningful anymore. How could he care about composing shots or color balance when children were being hurt, when evil hid in plain sight? His phone rang. A familiar number, Detective Hendricks. "Got something you might want to hear. Remember Glenda's sister, Lenora? The one who encouraged her? That's the one. Turns out she's been under investigation too. Federal probe into that online community you helped expose. They found evidence she was actively coaching other members on how to abuse kids without leaving evidence. She's being charged federally. Williams felt grim satisfaction. Good. There's more. The community had hundreds of members. So far, 73 have been charged across 16 states. Children have been removed from dangerous homes, placed in protective custody. Your documentation started all of it. After hanging up, Williams sat in the quiet, processing. He'd wanted revenge against Glinda for hurting Elmer. He'd gotten that. And more. She'd spent decades in prison, her reputation destroyed, her beliefs exposed as the toxic ideology they were. But the real victory wasn't personal revenge. It was the children saved, the abusers caught, the system changed however slightly to better protect the vulnerable. That night, Williams pulled out his camera for the first time in months. Not for a client, not for a project, just for himself. He photographed his empty studio, the shadows and light, the space where Elmer had healed and grown. He photographed the city outside his window, Portland streets where countless lives intersected, where joy and tragedy played out in private homes behind closed doors. He photographed his own hands, the hands that had held a hurt child, that had documented abuse, that had fought for justice. These images would never be displayed, never be sold. They were just for him, a record of transformation. The photographer who'd always observed from a distance had stepped into the frame, become part of the story, changed its outcome. 3 days later, Williams visited Daryl and Carly's house for dinner. The first time he'd been invited since the investigation began. The house looked different. The nursery had been repainted in soft colors, the damaged wall repaired. Photos of Elmer covered every surface, capturing his growth and recovery. Carly had cooked simple food, nothing fancy, but made with care. They sat together, the three of them and Elmer in his high chair, attempting normalcy. "We're selling this house," Daryl said quietly. "Too many bad memories. Found a place closer to your studio. Actually, thought maybe you'd want to be near enough to drop by regularly." Williams nodded. "I'd like that." "We can never thank you enough," Carly added, her eyes shining with tears. "For saving him. For believing me. For giving us a chance to prove we could change." "Just keep proving it," Williams said. "Every day. That's all the thanks I need." That night, driving home through Portland's rain-slicked streets, Williams felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had happened for simple happiness. But peace. The quiet knowledge that he'd done what needed doing, protected who needed protecting, stood up when others would have looked away. His phone chimed. An email from a gallery owner who'd seen his recent media appearances, interested in displaying his documentary work about abuse and advocacy. An opportunity to use his art for purpose again, to keep shining light on darkness. William smiled. Maybe his father would have been proud after all. He thought about Elmer, sleeping safely in his crib at Daryl and Carly's house. About Glinda, beginning her 20-year sentence. About the children rescued from the online abuse network. About cycles broken and justice served. It wasn't a perfect ending. Nothing ever was. But it was an ending where the good guy won, where the innocent were protected, where consequences found those who deserved them. William Sullivan had started this journey as a photographer who observed life from behind a lens. He'd emerged as something different, a protector, an advocate, someone willing to fight. And if another child needed help, another injustice needed exposing, another battle needed fighting, Williams would be ready. The rain continued falling on Portland, washing the streets clean, and Williams drove home knowing he'd done everything in his power to make a small corner of the world a little bit safer, a little bit more just. That would have to be enough, because some victories weren't about perfect endings. They were about choosing to act when action mattered, standing firm when others faltered, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Williams had done all of that and more. And in the quiet of his studio that night, reviewing the photographs he'd taken, he finally understood what his father had never lived to see. That art wasn't about escaping reality. It was about engaging with it, documenting it, changing it, one exposure at a time. And there you have it. another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Marriage. Vincent Torres had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years in Army Special Forces had taught him to spot deception from a mile away, to sense when someone was lying before they even opened their mouth. Yet somehow, he'd missed the signs in his own home for 3 years. At 38, Vincent was a man who commanded respect without saying a word. His dark eyes held the kind of intensity that made grown men uncomfortable, and his 6'2" frame carried the disciplined posture of someone who'd never truly left the military behind. After his service, he built Torres Security Solutions from nothing into the most sought-after private security firm in the Southwest. Wealthy clients paid premium rates for his team's protection, knowing that Vincent's word was absolute and his loyalty unbreakable. Until someone broke theirs first. Lila Torres had been the perfect military wife during his service years. Beautiful, supportive, never complaining about the long deployments or the dangers of his missions. Her auburn hair and warm smile had been his anchor through the darkest operations, her letters the light that guided him home. When Ruby was born 8 years ago, Lila had seemed to transform into the ideal mother, doting on their daughter with a tenderness that melted even Vincent's hardened heart. But perfection, Vincent had learned, was often just another word for deception. The cracks had started small. Lila staying out later with her book club, mysterious phone calls that ended when he walked into the room, new clothes and jewelry she claimed were gifts from friends. Vincent's training screamed at him to investigate, but the part of him that loved his wife whispered that he was being paranoid. After all, hadn't he seen enough broken marriages in the military? Hadn't he promised himself he'd trust his wife completely? Ruby, their 8-year-old daughter, had inherited Vincent's observational skills and Lila's beauty. She was precocious in a way that sometimes unnerved adults, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of matters they preferred to avoid. Vincent adored her fierce intelligence, even when it made him uncomfortable. She was the one pure thing in his life, the one person whose loyalty he never questioned. The previous month had brought strange changes to their household routine. Lila had grown distant, distracted. She'd started talking about taking a solo vacation, claiming she needed time to find herself. Vincent had agreed, though every instinct screamed against it. He'd even helped her plan the trip to the remote cabin in Colorado, thinking that maybe space would help them reconnect when she returned. He should have known better. Vincent Torres didn't believe in coincidences, and he should have trusted that instinct when the State Patrol called him at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. "Mr. Torres, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife, Lila Torres, was involved in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 34 near Loveland Pass. The car went over the guardrail during the snowstorm. I'm afraid there were no survivors." The words had hit him like shrapnel, tearing through his chest and leaving him gasping. They'd found Lila's rental car at the bottom of a ravine, burned beyond recognition. Her purse, her ID, her wedding ring, all recovered from the wreckage. The body was too badly damaged for viewing, they'd said. DNA confirmation would take weeks, but the evidence was conclusive. Vincent had arranged everything with military precision. The funeral, the flowers, the reception. He'd held Ruby as she cried, had accepted condolences from friends and family, had played the part of the grieving widower perfectly. Inside, he'd felt nothing but a cold, hollow rage at the universe for taking away the one person he'd allowed himself to love completely. Now, standing in their bedroom 3 weeks later, Vincent stared at the framed photo on Lila's nightstand. It showed the three of them at Ruby's 7th birthday party, all smiles and laughter. But as he looked closer, he noticed something he'd missed before. The way Lila's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the subtle distance in her posture, even as she held Ruby close. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother Miguel. "Funeral's tomorrow. You sure you're ready for this?" Vincent typed back, "Ready as I'll ever be." But as he set the phone down, his gaze fell on Ruby's iPad lying on Lila's dresser. His daughter had been unusually quiet since the accident, spending hours on the device instead of playing with her toys. When he'd asked what she was doing, she'd simply said she was looking for Mommy. Children processed grief differently, the counselor had told him. Some became withdrawn, others acted out. Ruby's quiet obsession with the iPad seemed harmless enough, but something about her behavior nagged at Vincent's trained instincts. Tomorrow they would bury his wife. Tomorrow he would say goodbye to the woman he'd loved for 12 years. Tomorrow he would try to move forward with the wreckage of his life. But tonight, Vincent Torres had the strangest feeling that tomorrow would bring answers he wasn't prepared to hear. Chapter 2. The Accident That Wasn't. The morning of Lila's funeral dawned gray and bitter, matching Vincent's mood as he helped Ruby into her black dress. She'd been unusually compliant, none of her typical 8-year-old resistance to formal clothes. Instead, she'd clutched her small purse and phone with a determination that reminded Vincent uncomfortably of himself preparing for a mission. "Daddy," Ruby said as they drove to St. Mary's Cathedral, "what happens if someone isn't really dead?" Vincent's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Like in movies. Sometimes people pretend to be dead, but they're really alive. That's just make-believe, Ruby. In real life, when someone dies, they don't come back." Ruby was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window. But what if they were never really dead to begin with? The question sent ice through Vincent's veins, but he forced his voice to remain calm. "Why would you ask that?" "Just wondering." Vincent had learned to read between the lines of his daughter's carefully chosen words. Ruby never asked random questions. Every inquiry was purposeful, leading somewhere specific. But today wasn't the day to probe deeper. Today was about saying goodbye to the woman who'd been their anchor, their heart, their home. The cathedral was packed with mourners. Lila's friends from various social groups, neighbors, clients from Vincent's business who'd known her through company events. Vincent mechanically shook hands and accepted condolences, his mind cataloging faces out of habit. Military training died hard. Even in grief, he found himself noting who attended, who seemed genuinely upset, who appeared to be going through the motions. Derek Manning stood near the back, looking appropriately somber in his dark suit. Vincent knew him peripherally. Lila had mentioned him as a friend from her photography class at the community college. He was the type of man women found charming. Tall, athletic build going soft around the edges, easy smile, carefully styled blonde hair. The kind of man who looked good in photos and made effortless conversation at parties. Vincent had never liked him, though he'd never been able to articulate why. Derek's handshake was too firm, his eye contact too intense, his interest in Lila's photography too keen. But Lila had insisted he was just a friend, and Vincent had pushed his suspicions aside as post-military paranoia. Now, watching Derek's performance of grief, Vincent felt that familiar itch between his shoulder blades, the one that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. The service was everything Lila would have wanted. Beautiful flowers, heartfelt eulogies, her favorite hymns. Father Morrison spoke about love eternal and the comfort of knowing Lila was in a better place. Vincent held Ruby's hand throughout, feeling her small fingers grip his tightly whenever someone mentioned her mother. As they prepared to move to the cemetery for the burial, Ruby tugged on Vincent's sleeve. "Daddy, I need to tell you something." "What is it, sweetheart?" Ruby glanced around nervously, then pulled out her phone. "I've been doing research about Mommy's accident." Vincent's blood chilled. "Ruby, what kind of research?" "The kind you taught me. Remember when you showed me how to use the computer to find information? About checking sources and looking for proof." He'd been teaching her basic research skills for a school project, never imagining she'd turn those lessons toward investigating her mother's death. "What did you find?" Ruby's voice dropped to a whisper, her 8-year-old seriousness carrying weight that made Vincent's chest tight. "Daddy, there's something wrong with Mommy's accident. The dates don't match up." "What do you mean?" "The police said Mommy crashed on Monday night during the storm." "But look," Ruby showed him her phone screen. displaying a weather website. There wasn't any storm that night. The big snowstorm was 3 days earlier. And look at this. She swiped to a social media page Vincent didn't recognize. The profile showed Lila's photo, but the name read Lily Manning. The most recent post was dated just 2 days ago after the supposed accident. Vincent's world tilted sideways. The careful control he'd maintained throughout the funeral service cracked, and beneath it, something dark and primal began to stir. He stared at the screen, his mind racing through implications and possibilities, each one more devastating than the last. Where did you find this? I remember the name Derek from when Mommy talked about her photography friend. So I looked him up, and I found this page in his friends list. Daddy, I think we need to leave. Now. Vincent's voice carried the command authority that had directed soldiers through life and death situations. Ruby nodded, understanding instinctively that something had shifted, that the game had changed in ways she was too young to fully comprehend. As they walked toward the cemetery, Vincent's mind was no longer on the funeral, the flowers, or the mourners offering their sympathies. Instead, he was analyzing, planning, calculating. The skills that had made him legendary in the military, that had built his security empire, that had kept dangerous people safe from even more dangerous threats. All of it focused now on a single, burning question. If Lila Torres was supposed to be dead, who exactly were they about to bury? Chapter 3. The Phone Revelation. The cemetery procession moved with somber dignity, but Vincent felt like he was walking through a nightmare. The mahogany casket, the pristine white flowers, the grieving faces, all of it suddenly seemed like an elaborate stage production, and he was the only one who didn't know he was watching a performance. Ruby walked beside him, her small hand clutching his with unusual intensity. She kept glancing at her phone, then at Derek Manning, who had positioned himself among the pallbearers with practiced solemnity. Vincent's daughter had always been observant, but today her attention was laser-focused in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of himself during reconnaissance missions. As Father Morrison began the graveside service, Vincent found himself studying the mourners with new eyes. Who else knew? Who else was part of whatever elaborate deception had convinced him his wife was dead? The thought of being manipulated, of having his grief weaponized against him, filled Vincent with a cold rage that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. During my mother's funeral, my 8-year-old daughter grabbed my hand and whispered, "Dad, we need to leave. Now." The words cut through the priest's eulogy like a knife. Vincent looked down at Ruby, whose face had gone pale as she stared at her phone screen. I turned and asked, "Why?" She quietly pulled out her phone. "Look at this." Ruby's fingers trembled as she showed him the screen. It displayed a live video feed from what appeared to be a social media story. The timestamp showed it was posted just minutes ago. And there, very much alive and laughing in what looked like a tropical setting, was Lila Torres. She was wearing a red bikini Vincent had never seen before, her hair styled differently, her skin glowing with a tan she'd never had during their marriage. But it was unmistakably her. The woman they were supposedly burying was very clearly alive and seemingly happy somewhere thousands of miles away. In that moment, I froze. Vincent's world collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of a heartbeat. The grief, the pain, the careful arrangements, all of it had been a lie. His wife hadn't died in a car accident. She had faked her own death, leaving him to mourn a ghost while she started a new life somewhere else. The fury that rose in Vincent's chest was unlike anything he'd experienced, even in the heat of combat. This wasn't just betrayal. It was psychological warfare waged against him by the one person he'd trusted completely. She had used his love for her as a weapon, had made him complicit in his own destruction. But the tactical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through impossible odds, was already working. If Lila was alive, if this was all an elaborate fake, then someone had to have died in that car crash. Someone had to be in the casket they were about to lower into the ground. And Derek Manning's positioning among the pallbearers suddenly took on a sinister significance. Vincent's gaze swept the crowd, looking for tells, for signs of guilt or knowledge. Most faces showed genuine grief, but a few, Derek's included, seemed to be performing rather than feeling. There was something calculated in the way Derek occasionally glanced at his watch, something rehearsed in his interactions with other mourners. Ruby tugged on his sleeve again, her voice barely audible. "Daddy, there's more." She swiped to another screen, this one showing a bank transfer notification from an account Vincent didn't recognize. The amount made his blood run cold. $2.3 million, transferred just that morning to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was nearly exactly the amount of Lila's life insurance policy. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about leaving him. It was about stealing from him. They had killed someone, used that body to fake Lila's death, collected the insurance money, and left him to grieve while they lived luxuriously on his dime. Vincent's hands clenched into fists as Father Morrison asked the assembled mourners to bow their heads in final prayer. Instead, Vincent was memorizing faces, noting who seemed genuinely moved and who appeared to be counting down minutes until this charade ended. "We need to go," he whispered to Ruby, who nodded eagerly. As the service concluded and people began to disperse, Vincent and Ruby slipped away from the main group. Vincent's mind was already shifting into mission mode, the cold analytical thinking that had made him successful in military operations and private security. He had been played, manipulated by experts who had underestimated one crucial factor. Vincent Torres had spent his entire adult life hunting dangerous people, and now he was about to become the most dangerous person in Lila and Derek's world. They reached the car as the first spadefuls of dirt hit the casket. Vincent helped Ruby into her seat, his movements mechanical as his mind raced through possibilities and plans. "Daddy." Ruby's voice was small, uncertain. "Are you okay?" Vincent looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She had just helped him uncover a conspiracy that could have destroyed their lives, had shown courage and intelligence beyond her years. But she was still his 8-year-old little girl, and she deserved better than being caught in the crossfire of what was about to come. "I'm okay, sweetheart, but things are going to be different now." "Different how?" Vincent started the engine, his reflection in the windshield showing eyes that had gone flat and cold, the expression his enemies had learned to fear in the moments before he struck. "Mommy made some very bad choices, Ruby, and now Daddy has to fix things." As they drove away from the cemetery, Vincent was already planning. He had resources, connections, skills that Lila and Derek couldn't imagine. They had made one critical error in their perfect crime. They had left behind a man who specialized in making problems disappear. And Vincent Torres was about to show them exactly how good he was at his job. Chapter 4: The Hunter Awakens. Vincent's home office looked like a war room within 6 hours of leaving the cemetery. Maps, photos, bank records, and computer printouts covered every surface. His military training had taught him that successful operations required thorough intelligence gathering, and discovering your wife's fake death definitely qualified as an operation. Ruby sat cross-legged on the floor, her laptop open as she worked with the focused intensity she'd inherited from him. Vincent had initially hesitated to involve her, but Ruby had made it clear she wasn't stepping aside. "She lied to me too, Daddy," she'd said with 8-year-old logic that cut straight to the truth. "I want to help catch the bad guys." "Tell me about this social media profile again," Vincent said, studying the printouts Ruby had made. "It's not listed under Mommy's real name," Ruby explained, pointing to the screen. "But look at the metadata on the photos. They were all taken with the same phone model Mommy has, and if you enhance this reflection in her sunglasses, you can see part of a hotel name." Vincent smiled grimly. His daughter was displaying investigative skills that would impress his professional contacts. "Good work. What else?" "The location tags are disabled, but there's a pattern in the backgrounds. Palm trees, white sand, that specific shade of blue water. I think they're in the Caribbean. Maybe the Bahamas or Turks and Caicos." While Ruby continued her digital archaeology, Vincent was making calls to contacts from his military and security days. The network of favors, information, and mutual assistance that existed among former special operations personnel was vast and largely invisible to civilians. Within 2 hours, he had confirmation that Derek Manning had booked flights to Nassau 3 days before Lila's supposed accident. But the most interesting information came from Tommy Restrepo, a former Delta Force medic who now worked in forensic consultation. "Vince, you're not going to like this," Tommy said over the encrypted call. "I pulled some strings and got a look at the accident report. The body they found? Dental records were a match for your wife, but that's because they only found fragments. The fire was so hot it basically cremated everything. Someone could have planted dental fragments? If they knew what they were doing, absolutely. And here's the kicker. The blood samples they used for DNA comparison? They came from your wife's doctor's office. Recent blood work from her annual physical." Vincent's jaw clenched. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was a sophisticated, long-term plan. They had been setting up this deception for months, collecting DNA samples, establishing alibis, creating false identities. "Tommy, I need to know who died in that car. Already working on it. Give me 24 hours. After ending the call, Vincent turned to find Ruby watching him with the too serious expression that reminded him she was far more perceptive than most adults gave her credit for. "Daddy, what are we going to do when we find them?" The question hung in the air between them. Vincent had spent his adult life operating in worlds where justice wasn't always served by courts and legal systems. He'd eliminated threats that endangered innocent people, had made hard choices in service of the greater good. But this was personal in a way that made those previous missions seem abstract. "We're going to make sure they can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt us," he said finally. Ruby nodded, accepting this with a matter-of-fact way children processed difficult truths. "Are we going to tell the police?" "Eventually. But first, we need to gather all the evidence. We need to understand exactly what they did and how they did it." What Vincent didn't tell his daughter was that the evidence gathering served a dual purpose. Yes, they would need proof for the authorities. But more importantly, Vincent needed to understand every detail of Lila and Derek's plan so he could construct something far more devastating in return. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw you at the service today. Lila would be so proud of how strong you're being. A friend." Vincent showed the message to Ruby, who immediately began tracing the number. "Burner phone," she announced after a few minutes. "But it was activated at a store in Miami yesterday." Miami, close to the Caribbean, perfect for island hopping. Vincent felt the familiar cold satisfaction of pieces falling into place. Another text arrived. "The insurance money should help you and Ruby start fresh. Sometimes the dead can be more generous than the living." This time, Vincent's smile was razor sharp. They were taunting him, convinced they had executed the perfect crime. They thought they were dealing with a grieving widower who would take his insurance payout and fade into quiet suburban obscurity. They had no idea they had just awakened something far more dangerous than they could imagine. "Ruby, I need you to do something for me," Vincent said, his voice carrying the calm authority she recognized from his serious moments. "I want you to keep tracking everything you can find about Mommy and Derek online. But I also want you to start packing a bag. Are we going somewhere?" "Soon. Very soon." Vincent looked at the wall map where he'd been marking locations, times, and connections. Tommy would have the identity of the real victim within hours. His contacts in the islands would pinpoint Lila and Derek's exact location by tomorrow. And then Vincent Torres would remind the world why certain people had learned to fear him in the darkness between nations. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. "Carlos, it's Vince Torres. I need a favor, and I need it off the books." The voice on the other end was gravelly but warm. "Vince, heard about Lila, man. I'm sorry for your loss. Actually, Carlos, that's what I'm calling about. Turns out my wife isn't as dead as everyone thinks she is." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Oh, brother, what do you need?" "Everything you've got on identity theft, document fraud, and offshore banking." "And Carlos? This one's personal." Vincent Torres had spent years protecting other people from the monsters that lurked in the shadows of civilized society. Now it was time to remind his wife and her lover that sometimes the greatest monster was the one you invited into your home. Chapter 5. The Web Unravels. Tommy Restrepo's call came at 3 a.m., which told Vincent everything he needed to know about how disturbing the information was. Former special ops personnel only called at those hours when the news couldn't wait for daylight. "Vince, you sitting down? Just tell me. The body in your wife's car belonged to Isabella Santos, 26 years old, reported missing from Tampa 6 weeks ago. Worked at a dental clinic." Vincent's blood ran cold. "The same clinic where your wife had her dental work done last year?" "Yeah." This Isabella had access to dental records, x-rays, everything needed to fake the identification. "The police think she was selling information to identity thieves, but I think she got in over her head. They killed her for her silence." "Looks that way." "And Vince?" "She had a 3-year-old daughter. The kid's been in foster care since Isabella disappeared." The revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. This wasn't just about stealing from him. They had murdered a young mother and orphaned a child. Isabella Santos had probably thought she was participating in some minor insurance fraud, never realizing she was signing her own death warrant. Vincent looked across his office to where Ruby was sleeping on the couch, surrounded by printed photos and evidence. His daughter had worked until midnight, driven by the same relentless focus that characterized everything she inherited from him. She deserved to know her mother was alive, but she also deserved justice for Isabella Santos. "Tommy, I need everything you can find on this woman. Background, connections, how she met Derek and Lila. Already on it. But Vince? There's more. I ran Derek Manning through the system, and this isn't his first time at this particular rodeo." Vincent's grip tightened on the phone. "Explain." "Derek Manning married a wealthy widow in Phoenix 3 years ago. Caroline Hutchins inherited $2 million from her first husband's construction business. 6 months after the wedding, Caroline died in a hiking accident. Derek collected a nice insurance payout and disappeared. Son of a bitch. Gets better. Before Caroline, there was Margaret Shun in Portland. Different last name then, he was Derek Walsh. Similar pattern. Whirlwind romance, quick marriage, suspicious accident, insurance money, and Derek vanishing into thin air." Vincent was already moving, pulling files and making notes. "He's a professional black widower. Bingo. And your wife wasn't his mark. She was his partner. The social media profiles Ruby found? They go back 8 months, which means Lila was planning this long before she ever mentioned that photography class." The pieces were forming a picture that made Vincent's jaw clench with rage. Lila hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She had become part of a conspiracy that murdered innocent women for money. The woman he'd loved, the mother of his child, was a serial killer. "There's one more thing," Tommy continued. "Derek's got a boat registered in Nassau. 40-foot cabin cruiser called New Horizons. Perfect for moving between islands without leaving paper trails." Vincent smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Tommy, you're worth every favor I owe you. What's your play here, Vince? Because if you're thinking about going down there yourself, I'm thinking about a lot of things. None of them involve calling the FBI and hoping they can extradite 2 murderers from a non-extradition country." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "You need backup, you call me. Some things are too big for one man, even someone like you." After ending the call, Vincent sat in the darkness of his office, processing the magnitude of what he'd discovered. This wasn't just personal betrayal. It was a criminal enterprise that had claimed multiple lives. Isabella Santos, Caroline Hutchins, Margaret Shun, and God knew how many others. The legal system would take years to sort through jurisdictional issues, extradition treaties, and international banking regulations. By then, Lila and Derek would have disappeared into new identities, ready to claim new victims. Vincent had never been particularly patient with legal systems anyway. His secure laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Carlos, his contact in maritime security. The message contained boat registration records, harbor surveillance photos, and most importantly, confirmation that New Horizons was currently docked at Paradise Island Marina in Nassau. The photos showed Derek and a woman who was unmistakably Lila, though her hair was now platinum blonde and styled completely differently. They looked relaxed, happy, triumphant. In one image, Derek was raising a champagne glass in what appeared to be a toast. celebrating their successful murder and theft, no doubt. Vincent's phone buzzed with another taunting text. Hope you're sleeping well, knowing Lila is finally at peace. Some people are just meant for better things. This time, Vincent typed back, enjoyed the champagne celebration. Paradise Island looks beautiful this time of year. His phone remained silent for nearly an hour. Then who is this? Vincent smiled and typed, someone who knows exactly what you did to Isabella Santos. No response came, but Vincent didn't need one. He just fired the first shot across their bow, letting them know their perfect crime had been exposed. Now they would scramble, make mistakes, reveal vulnerabilities he could exploit. Ruby stirred on the couch, blinking awake in the dim light from his computer screen. Daddy, did you find something? I found everything, sweetheart. And tomorrow we're going to start making the bad people pay for what they did. Ruby sat up, instantly alert. Are we going to the island? Vincent looked at his daughter, seeing the steel in her eyes that matched his own. Ruby had lost her innocence to this conspiracy, had been forced to grow up too fast because of her mother's choices. But she had also proven herself to be remarkably capable, and Vincent was beginning to think their enemies had severely underestimated the Torres family. We're going to do something better than that, Vincent said. We're going to bring the island to them. As dawn broke over the Texas horizon, Vincent Torres began planning an operation that would demonstrate why some people should never have awakened the sleeping wolf they thought they had safely caged. Chapter 6. The Trap Sets. Vincent's plan took shape over 3 days of meticulous preparation, the kind of methodical approach that had made him legendary in military circles. Unlike his enemies, who had relied on deception and misdirection, Vincent's strategy was built on superior intelligence, overwhelming force, and the tactical advantage of fighting on terrain of his choosing. The key insight had come from Ruby, who pointed out something Vincent's professional training had initially overlooked. Daddy, they think you're sad and broken, she said while reviewing the surveillance photos. But what if we made them think you were something else instead? Like what? Like someone they should be scared of. Vincent had spent 48 hours establishing a new digital presence for himself, one that Derek and Lila would inevitably discover if they investigated their newly aware victim. Public records now showed Vincent Torres as the CEO of multiple offshore security companies, with contracts for asset recovery and problem resolution in countries that didn't ask too many questions. Professional forums contained references to his work in extreme extraction scenarios and permanent threat neutralization. None of it was technically false. Vincent's legitimate security business had indeed handled sensitive international work, and his military record spoke for itself. But the new presentation painted a picture of someone far more dangerous than a grieving widower, someone who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The beauty of this approach, Vincent explained to Ruby as they reviewed boat schedules and flight manifests, is that they'll start making defensive moves instead of offensive ones. When people get scared, they make mistakes. Ruby had proven invaluable in the intelligence gathering phase. Her seemingly innocent requests for help with school projects had generated detailed information from teachers, neighbors, and family friends about Lila's activities in the months before her disappearance. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had been systematically distancing herself from their life, liquidating assets, and creating alibis. Mrs. Henderson says Mommy asked her lots of questions about travel, Ruby reported after a carefully orchestrated conversation with their neighbor. She wanted to know about places that don't have extradition treaties and how to open bank accounts without leaving paper trails. Vincent's contacts in the intelligence community had confirmed the worst of his suspicions. Lila's photography class had been a cover for meeting Derek, but Derek himself was part of a larger network of marriage and murder specialists. At least 6 other wealthy widowers had died under suspicious circumstances across the Southeast over the past 5 years, all connected to men who used similar methods to Derek's approach. The revelation that his wife wasn't just a betrayer, but an active serial killer had crystallized Vincent's resolve. This wasn't about recovering stolen money or punishing infidelity. This was about stopping predators who viewed human life as a commodity to be harvested. Tommy's follow-up investigation had revealed the full scope of their operation. Isabella Santos had been recruited through her job at the dental clinic, initially just to provide dental records for fake IDs. But when she'd grown suspicious and started asking questions, Derek had convinced her to meet him at a remote location. The medical examiner's private notes, which Tommy accessed through professional channels, indicated she'd been drugged before the car crash that provided her body for Lila's fake death. She died scared and alone, Vincent told Ruby as they studied Isabella's photo. And her little girl is growing up without a mommy because these people wanted our money. Ruby's jaw set in an expression that reminded Vincent powerfully of himself. They have to pay for that. Vincent's phone had been quiet for 2 days since his first text exchange with Derek, which meant they were likely planning their next move. Professional killers didn't simply disappear when confronted. They eliminated threats. Derek and Lila would be assessing whether Vincent represented enough of a danger to require permanent silencing. The answer Vincent planned to give them was unequivocally yes. Carlos had provided maritime intelligence indicating that New Horizons had left Nassau and was moving between various Bahamian islands, probably trying to establish alibis and create confusion about their location. But Derek's ego had provided Vincent with an unexpected advantage. The boat's GPS beacon was still actively transmitting to a tracking service, probably because Derek enjoyed the prestige of being monitored by international maritime security. Pride goeth before destruction, Vincent murmured, watching the boat's real-time location on his screen. What's that, Daddy? Something your grandmother used to say. It means that when people get too proud, they make mistakes that hurt them. Vincent's own mistake had been trusting completely, loving without reservation. But that mistake had also given him something his enemies lacked: absolute moral clarity about what needed to be done. His secure phone rang with a call from an unlisted international number. Vincent Torres? The voice was Derek's, but tighter and more controlled than the casual charm Vincent remembered from social encounters. Derek, how's the weather in paradise? We need to talk. I'm listening. You don't understand what you're interfering with. This is bigger than you think, and if you keep pushing, you're going to get hurt. Vincent's smile was cold enough to frost windows. Derek, I've been hurt. My wife faked her death, stole my money, and helped murder an innocent woman. The question isn't whether I'll get hurt. It's whether you understand what you've awakened. Vincent, let me save you some time with the threats and negotiations. I know about Isabella Santos. I know about Caroline Hutchins. I know about Margaret Chun. I know exactly what kind of operation you're running, and I know you made one critical error in judgment. What's that? You thought I was just another Mark. But I'm not a lonely widower looking for love, Derek. I'm the kind of person parents hire to get their kidnapped children back from places where governments can't reach. I'm the kind of person who makes problems disappear so thoroughly that they never existed in the first place. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. What do you want? Derek finally asked. Vincent looked at Ruby, who was watching him with proud intensity. I want you to remember that feeling you have right now. That cold fear in your chest, that knowledge that you've made a terrible mistake. I want you to hold on to that feeling, because it's the last mercy you're going to receive from me. Vincent ended the call and immediately powered down the phone. Let them chew on that for a while. When are we going to get them? Ruby asked. Soon, sweetheart. Very soon. But first, Vincent had one more piece of the trap to set in motion. He picked up his secure landline and dialed a number in Langley, Virginia. Morrison. Jim, it's Vince Torres. I need to cash in that favor you owe me. Jesus, Vince, I heard about Lila. I'm sorry, man. Save the sympathy, Jim. Turns out she's not as dead as advertised, and she's part of a serial murder operation targeting wealthy men. I'm going to need some unofficial assistance bringing her home. There was a pause. Vince, you know I can't authorize anything. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm asking for a blind eye and a clean extraction route when the job is done. Another pause, longer this time. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Vincent looked at the tracking data, showing Derek's boat moving toward Grand Bahama Island, probably seeking the protection of better developed infrastructure and security. 72 hours. I'll make some calls. But Vince? This conversation never happened. What conversation? As Vincent hung up the phone, he felt the familiar cold focus settling over him. the mental state that had carried him through the most dangerous operations of his military career. Derek and Lila thought they were dealing with a civilian, a victim who would eventually be intimidated into silence or eliminated as a liability. They were about to learn that some civilians were far more dangerous than any enemy they'd ever faced. Chapter 7. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Vincent and Ruby arrived in Nassau on a commercial flight, traveling under identities that would hold up to casual scrutiny but weren't meant for extended operations. Vincent's cover as a maritime insurance investigator gave him legitimate reasons to ask questions about boat rentals, harbor security, and recent vessel movements. Ruby, ostensibly his daughter, accompanying him on a business trip, had proven remarkably effective at gathering information from hotel staff and marina workers who were charmed by her precocious intelligence. The Atlantis Paradise Island Resort buzzed with the kind of wealthy tourists who wouldn't look twice at a successful businessman and his well-dressed daughter. Vincent had chosen their base of operations carefully, close enough to Derek's boat to maintain surveillance, visible enough to ensure Derek and Lila would know he'd arrived, isolated enough to provide multiple escape routes when the situation escalated. Because Vincent was absolutely certain it would escalate. "Daddy, the boat moved again," Ruby announced, studying her tablet from their ocean view suite. She'd become expert at tracking new horizons through maritime traffic websites and social media posts from other boaters who photographed the expensive yacht. "Where to this time?" "Compass K. It's about 60 miles southeast of here. Very remote, mostly uninhabited except for the swimming pigs." Vincent nodded, studying nautical charts spread across the suite's dining table. Compass K was perfect for Derek's purposes, isolated enough for private conversations, popular enough with day trip tourists that additional boats wouldn't attract attention. It was also, Vincent noted with grim satisfaction, completely outside of Bahamian police jurisdiction and far enough for Nassau that any incidents would take hours to investigate. His secure phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed home." Vincent typed back, "Where's the fun in that?" The response came quickly. "This isn't a game, Vincent. You're in over your head." "Derek, I've been in over my head in places you can't even pronounce. The difference is I always swim to the surface." Vincent's phone immediately rang. Derek's voice was tight with controlled anger. "You think you're some kind of action hero? This isn't Afghanistan, and you're not hunting terrorists. This is real life with real consequences." "You're right about the consequences part," Vincent replied calmly. "Isabella Santos found that out. So did Caroline Hutchins and Margaret Chun. The question is whether you've thought through the consequences of threatening a man whose job description includes making problems disappear." "Vincent, let me ask you something, Derek. In all your research on me, did you bother to find out what I did before I started my security company?" Silence. "I hunted people, Derek. People who thought they were untouchable, who hid behind borders and governments and money. I found them anyway, and I brought them home. Sometimes alive, sometimes not, depending on what they'd done and who they'd hurt." Vincent's voice dropped to the conversational tone he'd used during interrogations. Calm and reasonable and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood what lay beneath it. Isabella Santos was 26 years old. She had a 3-year-old daughter who's now in foster care because mommy went missing. Caroline Hutchins had grandchildren who still don't understand why grandma died on that hiking trail. Margaret Chin's parents flew her body back to Hong Kong for burial, and they still think it was a tragic accident. "Vincent, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You and my wife are predators who view human life as a renewable resource. The only question now is whether I kill you quickly or slowly." Vincent ended the call and looked at Ruby, who was watching him with the serious attention she gave to important lessons. "Daddy, are you really going to kill them?" The question deserved an honest answer. "Yes, sweetheart. They're bad people who hurt innocent families, and they won't stop unless someone makes them stop." Ruby nodded, processing this with 8-year-old pragmatism. "Will we get in trouble?" "Not if we're smart about it." Vincent's phone buzzed with another text. "We have a proposal. Mia's tomorrow at Compass K noon. Come alone and unarmed. We can work something out." Vincent showed the message to Ruby, who immediately began pulling up information about Compass K on her tablet. "It's a trap," she announced after reviewing satellite images and tourist websites. Of course it's a trap. The question is who's trapping whom. Vincent's own research had revealed that Compass K was indeed perfect for an ambush, dozens of hidden coves, thick vegetation, multiple escape routes by water. Derek and Lila probably planned to eliminate him there and dispose of his body in deep water, then disappear to another island chain before anyone noticed he was missing. They had made one critical error in their planning. They assumed Vincent would come alone. Tommy Restrepo's voice crackled through the encrypted satellite phone that evening. "Vince, I'm 30 minutes out with a full tactical package. You sure about this?" "I'm sure. They killed 4 people we know about, probably more. And they orphaned Isabella Santos's little girl. This ends tomorrow." "Roger that. What's the play?" Vincent outlined his plan while Ruby listened, occasionally offering tactical suggestions that impressed even Tommy's experienced judgment. The operation would be swift, decisive, and completely outside any legal framework that might allow Derek and Lila to escape justice through technicalities or jurisdictional disputes. "One more thing, Tommy. There's a 3-year-old girl in Tampa who needs a family. When this is over, I want to make sure she gets the best possible placement. Consider it done." As Vincent tucked Ruby into bed that night, she asked the question he'd been expecting. "Daddy, what about Mommy? I know she did bad things, but she's still my mommy." Vincent sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Your mommy made choices that hurt a lot of people, including us. And sometimes when people make really bad choices, they have to face really serious consequences. Even mommies? Especially people who are supposed to protect children, but choose to hurt them instead." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. "I understand, but it still makes me sad." "It makes me sad too, sweetheart. But some things are more important than being sad. Like making sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else." Exactly like that. As Ruby drifted off to sleep, Vincent stood on their suite's balcony, looking out over the dark Caribbean waters. Tomorrow would bring violence and finality, the kind of justice that courts couldn't deliver and governments wouldn't pursue. Vincent Torres had spent his career protecting innocent people from predators. Tomorrow, he would remind the world why predators had learned to fear the darkness where he operated. The hunt was almost over. Chapter 8: Blood in Paradise. The morning sun painted Compass K in deceptively peaceful pastels as Vincent approached the rendezvous point in a rented speedboat. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what Derek and Lila expected, a lone man coming to negotiate with his wife's killers. The boat's GPS showed Vincent following the designated route. His phone transmitted the proper location signals, and surveillance from Derek's position would confirm he was apparently alone and unarmed. What Derek couldn't see was Tommy Restrepo and 2 other former Special Operations personnel already in position on the island's eastern shore, or the combat equipment hidden beneath Vincent's casual tourist clothing. What Derek definitely couldn't detect was Ruby Torres, positioned 300 yards offshore in his second boat with a high-powered spotting scope and encrypted radio equipment. "Overwatch in position." Ruby's voice crackled through Vincent's earpiece. "Target vessel confirmed at the North Cove. 2 heat signatures visible on deck." Vincent smiled grimly. His daughter had insisted on participating in the operation's intelligence phase, and her natural aptitude for reconnaissance work was proving invaluable. She'd spotted Derek's boat 45 minutes before Vincent's scheduled arrival, noting that it was positioned to provide covering fire for anyone on the beach while blocking the most obvious escape route. "Roger, Overwatch." Approaching primary landing zone, Vincent beached his boat on the white sand of Compass K's main tourist area, a stretch of beach normally populated by day trippers coming to swim with the island's famous pigs. Today, the beach was empty except for Lila Torres, who stood near the waterline in a flowing white dress that made her look like a grieving widow rather than a serial killer. She was beautiful, Vincent noted with clinical detachment. The tropical sun had bronzed her skin. Her blonde hair caught the morning light, and her smile carried the same warmth that had once made him believe he was the luckiest man alive. Now that smile looked practiced, calculated, the expression of a predator who had perfected the art of appearing vulnerable. "Hello, Vincent." Her voice carried just the right note of sadness and regret. "I'm sorry it came to this." Vincent approached slowly, his hands visible and empty, playing the role of the confused husband seeking answers. "Are you? Sorry, I mean. Or are you sorry you got caught?" Lila's smile faltered slightly. "I never wanted to hurt you. Or Ruby. This was supposed to be clean, quick. You were supposed to grieve and move on. With Isabella Santos's blood on your hands." "That was Derek's idea. I wanted to use a body from a morgue, but Derek said it needed to be fresh for the DNA evidence to work." Vincent felt his anger spike at the casual way she discussed murdering an innocent woman, but he forced his voice to remain conversational. "So you killed her for convenience." "We did what was necessary." Lila's mask was slipping, revealing something cold and reptilian underneath. Isabella was already stealing from the clinic. She was already a criminal. She was a 26-year-old mother. She was a tool that served its purpose. Vincent's earpiece crackled. "Sniper team, target acquired on boat. Clear shot when ready." Vincent subvocalized his response. "Hold. Need both targets confirmed." Derek Manning emerged from the vegetation behind Lila, and Vincent noted immediately that he was armed. A pistol hung loosely in his right hand, positioned to look casual but ready for immediate use. Derek's smile was different from Lila's. Less practiced warmth, more predatory satisfaction. "Vincent fucking Torres," Derek said, his voice carrying mock camaraderie. "The legendary soldier boy who couldn't protect his own wife from seduction." "Actually, Derek, I'm starting to think I was protecting her from you." Derek's laugh was genuine this time. "Oh, that's rich. You think sweet little Lila was corrupted by the big bad Derek?" "Vincent, your wife approached me. She'd been planning this for 2 years before we ever met." Vincent looked at Lila, whose expression had shifted to something closer to her true nature. The warmth was completely gone now, replaced by the calculating coldness of someone who viewed other people as resources to be exploited. 2 years? Vincent asked. "Since Ruby started school," Lila confirmed. "I realized I was going to be stuck in suburban hell forever unless I did something about it. Derek just happened to have the expertise I needed. The expertise to commit murder." Derek shrugged. "I prefer to think of it as problem solving. Wealthy older men die in accidents all the time. Grieving widows collect insurance money and move on with their lives. It's a service, really. We give people the freedom to pursue their true desires instead of being trapped by societal expectations." Vincent's earpiece crackled. "Alpha team in position. Tango 2 has explosive device. Appears to be backup plan for eliminating primary target." Vincent's blood chilled. Derek wasn't just armed. He was prepared to eliminate all evidence of this meeting, probably including Lila, if she became a liability. "The thing is, Vincent," Derek continued, raising his pistol to a more threatening position, "you've become a problem that needs solving. You know too much, you've involved too many people, and frankly, you're starting to piss me off. You're going to kill me like you killed Isabella." "Actually, that's where you're wrong." Derek's smile turned genuinely nasty. "Isabella died quickly because she was just business. You've made this personal, so you're going to die very, very slowly. But first, you're going to watch what happens to your precious daughter." Vincent's world went red around the edges. "Ruby's not here." "Oh, but she is." Lila pulled out a pair of binoculars and pointed toward the water. Sweet little Ruby, sitting in a boat with a pair of binoculars, thinking she's helping Daddy with his spy games. Derek's associate is moving into position right now. Vincent's earpiece erupted with Ruby's voice. "Daddy, there's another boat coming fast. They have guns." In that moment, Vincent Torres stopped being a father seeking justice and became the predator that had earned his reputation in the world's darkest corners. Alpha Team, weapons free. Overwatch, emergency extraction. All targets are now hostile. Vincent moved as Derek tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Vincent had spent 20 years training for moments when talking ended and killing began. His hidden knife appeared in his hand and found Derek's throat before the other man could complete his draw. Derek gurgled and fell, his blood painting the white sand as Lila screamed and started running toward the tree line. Vincent's earpiece filled with gunfire as Tommy's team engaged the boat, moving toward Ruby's position. Overwatch, status. I'm okay, Daddy. The bad guy's boat is sinking. Vincent sprinted after Lila, who was faster than he'd expected, but not faster than someone who had spent his career chasing targets through hostile terrain. He tackled her 20 yards from the water's edge, both of them rolling in the sand as she clawed at his face and screamed curses that would have made his old drill sergeants proud. You killed her, Lila shrieked, her composure completely shattered. Isabella was my idea. She trusted me, and I handed her over to Derek because I knew he'd enjoy killing her slowly. Vincent's hands found Lila's throat, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the choice between justice and revenge. Vincent, Tommy's voice in his earpiece was calm, professional. Clean extraction in 30 seconds. What's your call? Vincent looked down at the woman who had been his wife, the mother of his child, the person he'd loved most in the world. She stared back at him with pure hatred, her mask finally completely discarded. Vincent, she wheezed. You can't do this. Ruby needs her mother. Ruby needs to know that monsters face consequences. Vincent's hands tightened, and Lila Torres died in the same paradise where she'd planned to spend the money earned from murdering innocent people. Alpha Team, all clear. Extraction complete. As Vincent walked back toward his boat, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Justice had been served, and the world was safer without Derek Manning and Lila Torres hunting innocent victims. But more importantly, Isabella Santos could rest in peace, and her daughter would grow up knowing that the people who killed her mother had paid the ultimate price. Chapter 9. The Price of Justice. 3 months later, Vincent Torres sat in his home office, reviewing the final reports on the Compass K operation. Officially, Derek Manning and Lila Torres had died in a boating accident while fleeing Bahamian waters after their insurance fraud was discovered. The explosion that destroyed their boat had been attributed to fuel system failure, a tragically common occurrence among inexperienced pleasure boaters who cut corners on maintenance. The official story held up to scrutiny because Vincent's contacts had ensured it would. Bodies lost at sea, no surviving witnesses, and a convenient paper trail showing Derek and Lila's increasing desperation as law enforcement closed in on their operation. The insurance companies were satisfied. The Bahamian authorities considered the case closed, and Isabella Santos's murder was officially solved with her killers listed as deceased. Ruby entered his office carrying a photo album, her expression more serious than any 8-year-old should have to be. She'd grown up considerably over the past few months, forced to confront truths about her mother that most adults would struggle to process. I finished organizing the pictures, she announced, setting the album on his desk. I kept the good ones of Mommy from before she became bad, but I threw away all the ones with Derek in them. Vincent opened the album and found himself looking at carefully curated memories. Family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Ruby had preserved the illusion of their happy family while systematically removing any evidence of the deception that had poisoned their lives. This is good work, sweetheart. How do you feel about it? Ruby climbed into his lap, a gesture she'd been making more frequently since returning from the Bahamas. I feel sad that Mommy chose to be bad, but I'm not sad that the bad people can't hurt anyone else. Vincent hugged his daughter, marveling at her resilience and wisdom. Ruby had seen things no child should see, had participated in events that would traumatize most adults. But she'd also learned lessons about justice, loyalty, and the price of betrayal that would serve her well throughout her life. Ruby, do you ever think about what we did? Do you feel bad about it? She considered the question with the serious attention she gave to all important matters. Daddy, bad people hurt good people because they think they can get away with it. When good people show them they can't get away with it, fewer bad people try to hurt good people. That's math, not feelings. Vincent smiled, recognizing his own pragmatic worldview reflected in his daughter's reasoning. Ruby Torres would never be a victim. She'd learned too early and too well that the world contained predators, and that sometimes the only way to stop them was through violence. His secure phone buzzed with a call from Tommy Restrepo. Vince, got some news you'll want to hear. Remember that list of Derek's previous victims we put together? Caroline Hutchins, Margaret Shunn, and the others. What about them? Turns out Derek kept detailed records of all his operations. Very detailed. The FBI found his storage unit in Phoenix, and it's like Christmas morning for cold case investigators across 6 states. Vincent felt a grim satisfaction. Derek's professional pride had provided a final service, ensuring that all his victims' families would finally have answers about what had happened to their loved ones. There's more, Tommy continued. The evidence tied Derek and Lila to at least 12 murders over the past 5 years. The insurance payouts alone totaled over $15 million. They weren't just serial killers, Vince. They were one of the most successful criminal partnerships in modern history. Until they made the mistake of targeting the wrong family. Exactly. Oh, and that little girl, Isabella's daughter? The adoption went through. She's living with a great family in Tampa, and they've been told her mother died a hero helping to stop dangerous criminals. Vincent closed his eyes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Isabella Santos's daughter would grow up knowing her mother had been brave, not just a victim. Sometimes the truth was less important than giving people the story they needed to heal. After ending the call, Vincent found Ruby setting up a chessboard on his desk. "Want to play, Daddy?" "Always." As they played, Vincent reflected on the choices that had brought them to this point. He'd killed his wife and her lover, had orchestrated events that resulted in multiple deaths, had operated completely outside legal boundaries in pursuit of what he considered justice. By any conventional moral standard, he was a murderer. But by his own standards, the ones forged in military service and tempered by years of protecting innocent people from predators, he'd simply done what needed to be done. Ruby captured his bishop with her knight, a move he hadn't seen coming. "Checkmate in 3 moves," she announced with quiet confidence. Vincent studied the board and realized she was right. His daughter had become formidable at chess over the past few months, approaching the game with the same tactical thinking that had made her invaluable during their operation against Derek and Lila. "Well played. You're getting scary good at this. You taught me that the most important thing is to think ahead and never let your enemies see your real plan until it's too late to stop." Vincent smiled. Ruby Torres was going to be a force to be reckoned with as she grew older. Any future predator who tried to target his family would discover that the apple hadn't fallen far from the tree. His personal phone chimed with a text from his brother Miguel. Heard through the grapevine that Lila's life insurance finally paid out. "You and Ruby doing okay?" Vincent typed back, "We're exactly where we need to be.